Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Hello Hayes podcast, where we get advice. Sometimes I give it to you, and sometimes we get it together. And today is one of those days where we get advice together. I just practiced that opening line not too many times, but when I was sitting here writing my outline this morning, I feel like it would be helpful to have an opening line for this podcast about what it is. And I'm comfortable with that opening line. I think the opening line must be kind of broad because I'm experimenting with what this podcast is. And I think that what I said does actually encapsulate it. On the Hello Hayes podcast, which is a piece of the broader Hello Hayes universe philosophy, sometimes I read advice letters and give advice in the traditional Hello Hayes way that many of you first were introduced to my work. And then sometimes we switch up the format and we're just talking and catching up, though always with the goal of leaving an episode with more insight into ourselves and our feelings and who we are. But a problem I generally have, or something that generally makes me anxious, is when I'm asked a question or I have to describe something in like a succinct way. And to ease some of I just think it would just be good for me to have an opening line for what this podcast is. So, what did I literally write down? Welcome back to Hello Hayes, the podcast where we get advice that hopefully helps us understand ourselves better. That is not what I said when I opened it up, but that's what I wrote down. If you have thoughts on that, let me know in the comments, or if you have any, one sentence descriptions on what this show should be. Curious to hear what you think. But in today's show, we're talking about how to get your motivation back when you feel like you've lost it forever. I go over the 10 or so tips that I've used this year to help me get my motivation back in dark times. And this idea came up the other day because I was getting lunch with a friend and we were talking about what we did that week. Like what our work weeks looked like, blah, blah, blah. And I had mentioned that I did a podcast and a newsletter that week, which I had previously this year have taken breaks from in various forms. And now I think the phrase I used is I'm feeling my motivation again. And another way to say that is I'm feeling my spark again. I feel like myself again. And she asked me, which I so appreciate this question. She said, "How did you do that? How did you get your motivation back?" Instead of just sort of nodding or saying that's so great, which are also, saying that's so great to someone who tells you they get their motivation back is a perfectly acceptable way to engage. But I appreciated the question because it encouraged me to like pause and reflect. How did I get my motivation back? And I gave her some answer that was true, where I started to work it out in real time, as you can do with genuine good friends who you're comfortable word vomiting and, thinking in real time with, kind of like we do here. And then I thought this would make a really great podcast episode because what I've done for myself this year, I'm really proud of. I'm really proud of how I've worked to get my motivation back. And I just wanted to reflect more on how it is I've been doing that because it has not been easy. And I want to be clear. What I'm about to tell you today, the pieces of advice about how to get your motivation back, I'm not sharing this with you from a place of 100% healing. I do not have all the answers and I certainly don't have it all figured out. I wouldn't say that I'm in the middle of it. I'm on the back half, like the back half of I have enough distance from my really painful moments where I can reflect on them and share actual, what in retrospect, wisdom. And I still have, one day a week, which depending on where you're at, that might sound like a lot to you or a little. I still have one day a week that I feel like I'm learning everything I'm about to say from scratch. Before 2 months ago, it was probably more like 4 days a week. So to get to one day a week where I have to refocus on all of this I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of myself for all of the days, but I'm proud of myself for getting here. So I'm making this podcast episode to share it with you in case you too are in need of finding your motivation for life, for your creativity again. And it's also for me on those days when I need the reminder from myself. One more word about what I mean by motivation. Today, as we talk about how to get your motivation back, it is not about when you're working on a project at work that you are too lazy to deal with. It's not for when you're annoyed that you have to do something on your to-do list. I'm talking about the form of motivation loss that is often a side effect of depression, grief, a breakup, burnout, the kind of motivation loss where you're like, what is the point of it all? What am I doing here? What is my purpose? How do I get my spark back? And I think that these tips may also apply to like the type of motivation loss where you're like, I just don't want to do this thing that I have to do. How do I get the motivation to just sit down at my desk and do it? But some of the tips you're going to see here are a little bit for that type of motivation loss. Part of the advice might just be like, just fucking Pomodoro method it, set your timer for 25 minutes and just get that shit done. I'd probably come up with something better to say, but the advice I'm giving here is much more, we start with the real baby steps. We start when things are just looking real grim. Okay? That's enough of a caveat. Excuse me. So let's dive in. The first step for me getting my motivation back began, or I should say, losing my motivation, realizing that I was losing my motivation began with me not wanting to get out of bed, having trouble getting out of bed in the morning. And the first step to start getting that back was to figure out, how can I help myself get out of bed in a way that sparks joy in some way. So the step there is identify something that makes you want to get out of bed and do that the first thing in the morning, whether that's a puzzle. I love puzzles. I'm like super passionate about puzzles. It's gotten me thinking that maybe one day I want to make like some sort of Hello Haze puzzle. Puzzles really, really heal my brain when I've lost motivation or I'm in a spiral. So maybe you wake up and you do a puzzle first thing. Maybe you wake up and you read a chapter in a novel. Just last week on the one day that I had a really hard day last week, really hard night that kind of sprung out of nowhere and was still there when I woke up in the morning. I opened my eyes and I was like, okay, it's still here. And I woke up, I came downstairs and I made a pot of coffee and then I made a box of muffins. Never know when you're going to make that box of muffins in your cupboard. Always good to have the, almond mills or whatever I think that's the brand I used, banana muffin. My mom has them. Just made a box of muffins and it didn't completely turn the day around, but it helped me start the day with something that kind of quieted my mind, eased my mind instead of immediately, started messing with my nervous system or spiked cortisol. So that's step one. Figure out something you like to do in the morning, something that comforts you, and do that first. Another key step to this morning routine is leaving your phone upstairs. So when I get up now and I wake up earlier in the morning and I have my morning routine, some days I write first thing, but on the days when writing feels unbearable, I'll do the, puzzle book muffin thing. My phone stays upstairs. I do not even look at my phone until around 9 a.m., which is a privilege given I work from home and whatever. But do not look at your phone during this like sacred morning time if you're on the journey to trying to get your motivation back. Nothing to suck the motivation out of you than looking at your email or social media first thing in the morning. The second thing, though, once you sort of get into that routine and you feel ready for it, is to try an elimination diet. But I'm not talking about food. Sometimes a loss of motivation is like a normal occurrence, right? It's not always a sign that something is wrong. We're not always going to feel inspired and motivated and yada, yada. But sometimes a loss of motivation is like an allergic reaction. And when you have an allergic reaction, you get a rash or you get a stomach ache, you're naturally going to think about, well, what did I eat that day? What did I do? What leaves in my backyard did I come in contact with? And let's say, to continue with the food analogy, though I don't believe in diets, maybe if I had to for a medical reason need to do some sort of elimination diet, I would, but I don't do diets. So just keep that in mind. If you thought there was a certain food that was making you sick, making you break out in hives, your doctor might recommend an elimination diet to figure out what the culprit is. When you're experiencing a serious loss of motivation for things that used to bring you joy, consider doing an elimination diet. And that means looking at all of the things you do and practicing cutting some of them out of your day. Now, Of course, there are some of those things in our day that are non-negotiable for most of us. Those will be things related to our day job or our night job or whatever pays the bills, and then any responsibilities we have to family members, whether you're a parent or you're a caregiver. It's hard to cut those things out of the day, though maybe there are ways to, if you have a fellow co-parent, do we call a co-parent your partner? If you're partnered and you have a children, if you're partnered and you have children, maybe there is somebody whom you can share the responsibility with at home. I recognize that there are some things we can't cut, but outside of the things we can't cut, there's a whole lot of stuff we all do every day because we think we should, because we think we must, because we've been doing them forever. And you might be able to cut some of those things out. One of those things, or perhaps your obsession with one of those things, could be part of why you're not feeling motivated for life anymore. Examples might be if you're super intense about your 5:30 a.m. workout class. And maybe it brought you joy for the first 2 years, but recently maybe you don't even know if it's not making you happy, but it brought you joy for a while and you're still doing it. But you know what? Does it actually give me joy? Maybe that's something you want to experiment taking out of your routine for a little bit. Maybe you always are getting weeknight dinners with friends. That's when all of your friends like to get together and you enjoy that, but you also feel exhausted all of the time. Maybe you want to experiment with only doing weekend dinners for a month or vice versa. Maybe you want to keep your weekends completely no plans, spontaneous things only, and filling your week with plans so that you can get a break over the weekend. When my motivation really began to plummet early this year, I took a look at all of the things that I had committed myself to. And a lot of this for me relates back to work. So that's the example I'll use, but you can think about it wherever it's leading you as you're listening. I looked at, okay, I have this newsletter that I was passionate about, but I sort of stopped doing, but I want to do that. I have this weekly video podcast. I'm making TikToks all the time. I have some other projects that I'm working on. I have other things that I do to make money. Well, I had to take a look at that and figure out, okay, I have to eliminate something. I have to eliminate something because something's not working. I don't know which one it is, but I will not figure it out. Have no hope of figuring out what's giving me this rash, what's giving me this allergic reaction if I don't start testing by removing things. So I started with taking a break on the podcast. And in doing so and giving myself that space, I started to figure out, okay, what parts of this weren't working for me. And then I ended up doing the same thing with TikTok. And I can't deny that part of the reason I'm finding my motivation again is because I was practicing taking things off my plate. Now, that all began in January and it's June. It's taken a long time. And that leads me to the next way you get your motivation back is through doing the elimination diet. Or when doing the elimination diet, you must be curious about what you notice. You got to be curious about what you notice. You got to be gentle with yourself about what you notice. And then you got to be honest. And man, it's really hard to be honest about what you notice. It's scary. Sometimes you realize that something you're doing that you really deep in your bones believe you must do. If I don't do that thing, my life is going to fall apart. That's how dramatic it can feel sometimes. If I don't go to my 5:30 a.m. workouts, when am I going to exercise? I'm never going to exercise then. And then my health is going to fall apart and my mental health is going to fall apart and I'm going to gain weight or whatever your spiral brain starts to tell you all of these bad things when really maybe those things that you think are bad are not bad at all. My brain certainly did that when I started to eliminate things. My brain, even when I wasn't, posting TikToks every single day of the week like I thought I was supposed to, my brain was still telling me that I needed to do that. And when I started doing less, for the first several months of doing less, I couldn't even appreciate or notice the benefits it was giving me in my elimination diet because I was so caught up in the shame spiral of like the fact that I was testing this anyway. But then with time, there was like the little voice in the back of my head that was like, you should probably pay attention to the fact that this feels kind of good. You should probably pay attention to the fact that when you're not waking up and immediately forcing yourself to be like, James Clear productivity expert, you're not like opening up your laptop and immediately reading your email and making your to-do list. Like that's helping you. You should probably pay attention to that. But it's scary, man. It's really, really scary. So the next piece of trying to get your motivation back is realizing that you need to test your treadmill speed. You got to figure out what your treadmill speed is. So think about yourself on a treadmill. My happy treadmill speed is like a 5.2. I haven't been on a treadmill in a very long time. And these days I actually prefer to just walk uphill and watch a video podcast. But 5.2, if I'm jogging, that's my happy speed. Now, I do really like to do like a 6.5 30-second sprint every now and then. But I certainly cannot run at 6.5 for a very long time. That's why those Barry's bootcamp classes were never very fun for me because I was always going a full count slower than the person next to me. Let's say I want to run on the treadmill for like 40 minutes. And why I want to run on the treadmill for 40 minutes is beside the point. Would never want to do that. But let's just say I did. If during that 40 minutes, I wanted to do 10 30-second sprints at 6.5 speed, what is my baseline speed that I would go the rest of the time so that I had the energy left to do those sprints? Is it 5.2? Is it slower? Or is it actually a little faster? I don't know. I'd probably have to test that out. But that's what I need to do for my life, for my work, to figure out how I like to work. I love a deadline. I work really well in a deadline. But I don't work really well when every day is at 6.5 speed. And I got to figure out how often I can go to 6.5 and what my speed needs to be the rest of the time. And you need to do that too. Oftentimes when you've lost motivation, it's because you weren't being cognizant of your ideal treadmill pace. And I don't have the answer about my treadmill pace, and you might not have the answer about yours, but it is part of this journey of getting my motivation back, is trying to really respect my pace, learn when to push myself and when to be gentle with myself. And I don't know, I'm not getting it right all the time. And to be really honest with you, I was really nervous about starting it's going to make me emotional. I was really nervous about starting the podcast again because I was scared that I'm going to fail because I won't be able to keep up with the pace. And I think for months, sometimes when you lose your motivation, what happens is that you lose your trust in yourself. And when I started all of this, I had so much trust in myself and so much belief in myself. And then I went through some hard things and just had a tough year. My mental health, I've been struggling with my mental health, and everything's okay. Everything is okay. And it's been hard. When you lose your motivation, you lose your trust in yourself sometimes. And I've been nervous to get started again. Even when I felt ready, I've been nervous because I don't want to let myself down, So I'm trying to be super cognizant as I'm getting back, as I'm feeling myself again, feeling like myself, but also feeling myself. Trying to get started in new ways that take some pressure off myself, even with this podcast and with the newsletter, those two things in particular. How can I really love making them. So how can I do this in a way where there's less pressure? Because not every single thing can be filled with pressure. It just can't. And if I want to do a lot of things, I have to be aware of my pace. And what goes hand in hand with pace is pressure, which leads me to my next tip, which I call practicing flexible discipline. Flexible discipline, two words that you might not think go together, but boy, do they. There's a time and place for discipline and different personality types, different working styles. Like maybe what you need is like a, boot camp style discipline. I do not need that. I don't need anybody yelling. I don't need another voice yelling at me. My inner critic does enough of that. I need to be more flexible with myself and take off pressure. There's some pressure that's really useful. Like I've said, I love a deadline. Deadlines are a part of my life. I love them. Bring them on. But sometimes when we've lost motivation, it's because we've put so much pressure on ourselves to, overperform, for it to be perfect, to show up consistently every single day. And let's be a little bit more flexible. Let's be a little more flexible with how we identify discipline. I think about, maybe some writers out there. I've been having some conversations with fellow writers recently, and I really like being like a mentor. I obviously, you guys are like, duh, Hayes, you literally write an advice column. I get a lot of joy and purpose in being able to, help and provide counsel to others, even when maybe especially when I'm going through it myself. And I was talking with a writer the other day who is a writer and has not been writing, hasn't written in a really long time. And he was asking me for my advice. And he said, sometimes I sit down and I stare at the blank page and then I never get started. And we talked about how he feels less pressure though when he's like writing things in his notes app and when he goes for walks. He like writes when he walks. And I said, well, why don't you stop expecting yourself, if you're trying to get your motivation back to write, stop expecting yourself to sit down at the desk and bang out a, Pulitzer Prize winning essay. Instead, go for a walk and write something while you're walking. Why is that writing time any less valuable than writing time at the desk? Flexible discipline. However you're going to get started, do that. I was talking with another friend the other night. She's saying that when she tries to sit down to write, there are no words. She has something she wants to write about and the words just will not come out of her, but she has no problem talking about it, she said. So I suggested, why don't you just do a voice recording? Talk to yourself, do a little voice recording. When it's done, transcribe your voice recording into a Google Doc, and there you go. You have your first draft. Now you have something to edit. Flexible discipline. How can you take a little pressure off yourself? This is my motto these days as I'm getting my motivation back. When I start to feel more pressure, when that boot camp voice comes back in my head, I say, okay, do you want to do this? Yes. Okay. Are you feeling under a lot of pressure right now? Yes, you are. Okay. What's one way I can take a little pressure off? How can I make this a little less serious? Because the work will be better. Whatever you're trying to do will be better if you, like me, don't thrive well under a constant, boot camp style voice. Another tip that's helped me get my motivation back is to be really ruthless about what I'm consuming. And there were like a lot of videos that I was watching. There were like some creators that I was following, or like I wasn't following, but I was watching all their stuff. And I was constantly watching. Like I was, binging their content, but I was feeling really bad about myself after. And it wasn't just that it was like, watching models or like rich people in all of their cool outfits. I was just watching stuff that was triggering something in me that made me feel empty after. And sometimes these videos were like perfectly lovely people that other people were commenting like, oh, you're my comfort creator. But I kind of realized that like consuming certain types of content wasn't comforting me. It was just making me doubt myself, making me compare my ideas to their ideas. It was kind of taking away my individual voice. And in turn, I've just been like really ruthless about what I consume now. And on that note, app limits are your friend. I'm talking about in your iPhone, how you can set app limits for your social media apps. at the recommendation of my friend Justine Snacks. You may know her. She has incredible recipes. Her cookbook's coming out, and we followed each other a while ago, and we exchanged numbers over TikTok, and then I texted her, and she happened to be coming to LA, and we had a great day together in LA. It was like just one of those times when you meet someone and you know right away, like, oh, this is my people. This person is my people. And she gave me really great advice. I'm a pretty vulnerable. I'm pretty I can be pretty open, but I'm only open with certain people when I sense that like they are the kind of vibe to receive me in the way I want to be received, if that makes sense. And right away with her, I'm like, "Oh, let me actually tell you what's going on and actually get your perspective and advice on this." And she said that she only gives herself 20 minutes a day on the apps, except for, of course, when she's posting, but the limit goes on for 20 minutes. And when she said it, my jaw dropped. I'm like, 20 minutes? That's no time at all. But later that afternoon, I set it up, and it's really helped with my doom scrolling and with the type of comparison that I was unintentionally doing on social media that was sucking all of the motivation out of me. So the app limit helps, but just be really ruthless about what it is you're consuming. Notice how you feel after. Part of the reason I'm excited to make more content on YouTube and to expand my advice column format into long form and some other formats is because when I'm watching certain YouTube creators, when I'm consuming YouTube, I don't feel like my time was wasted after. I don't feel bad about myself after. And that's not to say that there's not content on YouTube that does that. I'm not delusional. But there's a wider breadth of stuff that like really leaves me feeling like I've just gotten juice. Like I've just been juiced rather than I've been maybe saying I'm getting juiced is not the right analogy because that's sucking the energy out of you. But I feel like I've been given juice rather than my body being, juiced and zapped of all of its nectar. And the next, it's a lot of food analogies in here today. Geez, Hayes. Okay, the next thing that's helped me get my motivation back is making my flaws in quotes, making my flaws work for me. So something that have always felt as a flaw of mine is my procrastination, what I've called procrastination. If I have a deadline on Thursday and I knew, like if I owed my boss a draft of an article by the end of the day Thursday, and I knew that I could probably get a pretty good version done in 4 hours, even if I had 4 hours earlier in the week, like if I knew about the assignment on Monday, I would like kind of wait until the last 4 possible hours. And that quality of mine like always made me feel super ashamed. And I'd feel bad about myself every minute that I wasn't working on the thing that I knew was coming up. I might still be spending my time doing other purposeful stuff. I had more to do than just that one article. But like I'd feel bad about how I was avoiding a looming deadline. Now, I can't really imagine how many hours of my life I've spent shaming myself for my procrastination when, like, maybe that's actually one of my superpowers. And part of getting my motivation back has been saying that is one of your superpowers, actually. You work really well on a tight deadline. And you'd work even better on a tight deadline if you weren't shaming yourself the whole time. So what if, crazy idea, what if you use it to your advantage? What if you give yourself some friendly pressure, some low stakes pressure? And a really tactical example of this is, I have wanted to start my newsletter again, and my writing is one of the places where I can be incredibly obsessive and like perfectionist-y in a way that isn't even really very effective. There are some moments when I should really kind of obsess about the writing and edit it and edit and edit. But maybe if writing a weekly newsletter to connect with my audience and express myself through the written word, if that's something I want to do every week, maybe what I need to do then is wake up on Thursday morning, give myself 2 hours to write it, and then I'm going to send it off that day. And whatever I have in the 2 hour, whatever I've written in those 2 hours, That's what it's going to be. And maybe some weeks I'll say, actually, I have an idea that's going to take me longer. So I'll work a little harder on that. Or not work harder. I shouldn't put value on what I can write in 2 hours versus what I can write in 10 hours. So scratch that. But if I want to commit to writing something every week, some weeks that will mean I wake up and I write something casual that morning that still comes from the heart. And in doing that, making my flaw of procrastination actually become my superpower. That's helped me over these last 3 weeks. And again, I've only been experimenting with this for the last 3 weeks, so it's not like I have tons and tons of evidence that this works, but I felt a lot better these last 3 weeks. That means something. And the last thing I'll say is that if the motivation has been sucked out of you, you might want to re-examine what your goals are. Because sometimes lack of motivation comes from not having a recent conversation with yourself about what you're trying to achieve, what you even want, what actually makes you happy. I realized recently that I was still reaching for goals that I set a year and a half ago, even though so much has changed. Even though I actually surpassed many of those goals that I originally set, since I never sat down to intentionally reimagine what those goals are, I just kept wanting an abstract more. And part of my lack of motivation was just that I didn't even know what I was reaching for anymore, or I knew, but I had lost sight of. So I would suggest to you that you take a moment to ask yourself, what do I want right now? What are my goals? And make sure when you're thinking about that, you're considering how you want to feel and what you want your days to be like. And there are always going to be things we have to do because there are responsibilities and we must do them. Even within those, there are ways that we can make them better and more pleasurable and less pressure filled for ourselves. But what do you really want? Sometimes re-examining your goals doesn't mean you're throwing a goal away, but it's like making a slight tweak to it so that it's more in your favor and more aligned with your values and how you want to be showing up. So to use Instagram as an example, this is loosely based on a conversation I had with someone else recently, which also sounds very similar to a conversation I had with myself. So this person's an artist and they were talking with me about starting an Instagram. So I said, why do you want to start an Instagram? Why do you want to post on Instagram? And they said, well, I want to be known and respected as an artist. I'm like, all right, well, why does posting on Instagram, why will it help you do that? And they said, well, maybe I'll be able to sell my art on Instagram, right? Instagram's apparently a good marketing tool. And I said, okay, well, why do you want to sell your art? And they said, well, it's a dream of mine to make a living as an artist. Okay, that's fair. And there's a lot of truth to using social media as a tool to build a career as an artist. I'm doing it. Yes, there's truth to that. But if that line of thinking is not motivating you to post, we got to get a new way in there for you. So I asked more, how are you approaching Instagram? And they were not approaching it as an art form. They were not approaching it as an extension of their art. They were purely approaching it as a thing they had to do in order to reach their goals. I have to do this. Everyone says I have to post on Instagram, but let me tell you, posting on Instagram for your business, if your business is an expression of your artistry, it's not going to work. It's not going to work if you're forcing it, if you hate it, if you dread it. It's only going to work if it's truly something that inspires you. So maybe instead of saying I have to post on Instagram to sell my product, I have to post on Instagram because that's what you do when you're trying to start a business. The goal is not post on Instagram. The goal is figure out how to have fun on Instagram. That has to be the goal first if what you're trying to do is find your motivation to keep going. It has to be about finding the fun. And that's something I've been thinking about with Instagram too. I want to have a positive relationship with Instagram because there are so many I'm inspired by people who have fun on Instagram. And I can be one of those people. And I think I am when I am operating from that space of how fun is this? How fun is it that I get to do this? And you could get to do this too if you're an artist and want to sell your work or whatever. And hopefully if you follow me on Instagram, it looks like I've been having more fun. And I might not be posting all of the time. I'm not going to be the creator that's, you know, posting tons and tons of stories every day, which lots of people like to follow. And I like to follow some people who do that. I'm going to do it in a way that feels authentic and fun and creative for me. And ultimately, that's the only way it's going to work. Your goals are only going to happen if you are finding the middle ground between what works best for you and what's valuable in the market. Your needs and the world's needs have to intersect. You can't sacrifice one for the other. So when you're trying to get your motivation back, though, I think it's fair to focus a little bit more heavily on what it is you want and where it is you want to operate from and what feels sustainable and joyful and fun for you. And that's where I'm at with getting my motivation back. It's been working. Those tools, those reframes have been working for me. And I'm so grateful that my friend asked me that question. How did you get your motivation back? And what a great friend. What a great thing to ask someone when they're sharing with you, when they're sharing something they're proud of. When they say, "Oh, I'm feeling better," or "Oh, this wonderful thing happened." To ask them, "Well, how did you make that happen? How did you do that?" I'm so happy she asked me, or I might not have taken the time to think about this and then share it with you. And I'm going to be thinking about it more. And I know that the thing is, even as I exit this challenging, God, I hope I'm exiting. I am exiting. Even as I kind of come out of this challenging year of my life, I know there are days ahead of me where I will not have motivation again. We can't completely get rid of our pain. We can't completely get rid of the things that cause us pain, like the things that have happened to us. We can't change those. But over time, I think through skills like these and reminding yourself of the tools and the things that help you, I don't know, maybe those dark moments will be a little less intense when they come around. Maybe we'll be able to, see the light sooner. Maybe some of these tools you'll be able to share with people you live with or your friends so that they can maybe better understand you. And again, as I said in the beginning of this episode, I'm still in the thick of it. I'm saying all of this now, and there's going to be a time probably next week when I need to remind myself of some of these tools. And there will be times later in my life that I need to remind myself of these tools. This is not I expect that I expect that I will come up against a massive motivation loss again at some point because there's going to be pain and grief in life, especially being a person who is so sensitive and feels so many things. And I hope that by reflecting on these tools and constantly thinking about things like my treadmill speed, that I am setting myself up for success so that down the line as things happen, they're less debilitating when they do, or the pain lasts for a shorter amount of time. I don't know. Maybe we can't plan for everything, but I certainly try. I try. And that is all I got for today. Thank you so much for being here with me. Go ahead and watch another video if you're here with me on YouTube. My audio listeners, love you too. Remember, you can always watch this. I love putting up video podcasts on my TV in my bedroom at night or putting them on in the living room while I'm cooking and kind of going in and out. It's my preferred way to consume podcasts these days. But you do you. If you like listening, I will always be giving you the audio only versions. And leave a review if you haven't yet. So good to be back, and I'll see you soon.